أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. In the name of Allah, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon the holiest of His prophets, Muhammad, and the purified members of his household and progeny. And may God's peace and blessings be upon Imam al-Hussein and his companions and the family members who sacrificed their lives with him. In the previous nights we talked about the importance of knowledge and faith and transitioning from knowledge and faith to action. Tonight, inshallah, we will start talking about action, and I thought that we would start from the very basics, from the beginning. So I chose two topics for tonight that I hope will be as practical as possible, while keeping in mind everything that we mentioned in the previous nights. The first topic is that of prayer. And by prayer, I mean the 5 daily obligatory prayers. Every group of humans, when they come together, if that regrouping is organized in any way, they will have rituals. In Islam, perhaps the most important ritual, the most important regular action is the regular prayer. We have to understand why Islam accorded this kind of importance to the daily prayers, and we do this by looking at the philosophy of the prayer first. The point of the daily prayers in Islam is to ensure that there is a constant remembrance of the Lord, that the relationship between the human and his Lord is never broken, while going on with your daily affairs and daily activities. And this is an important point, because Islam is making a point to show how practical it is, how realistic it is. It doesn't ask you to spend your days and nights in a mosque. It tells you, go on with your daily affairs. Get to your studies, get to your business, do whatever you need to do, take care of your families, with that one condition of trying to remember God at all times. So it has put in place things to enable that in case one becomes distracted and forgets. One of the first benefits of having this constant reminder is that you're also constantly prevented from sinning. If every time you're about to sin, you remember that in a few minutes or a few hours you have to stand before God again, this thought will prevent you from committing the sin. And then in certain situations where we are too forgetful or too weak, and we actually perform the sin, then the prayer is there to force us to ask for forgiveness, to repent, either right before as a preparation for the prayer, or during the prayer. In addition to that, the prayer is also going to grant the person who prays on a regular basis with confidence and relief. As Muslims, we believe that all the affairs in the world are in the hands of God. God is all-powerful, and He controls every aspect of the universe at all times. So while you go on with your daily lives and daily struggles, life is full of difficulties and challenges. But then, more than once a day, 5 times a day, you reconnect with this God, with this Creator, who has that full, absolute power over all things, to keep reminding you constantly that although there are challenges, everything is still in the hands of God. And this gives you 2 functions. It enables you in 2 ways. First of all, you get to ask and pray for what it is that you want. And secondly, it also reminds you to accept the decree, to accept the desire and will of God. As for relief, it is more of a human condition, of a human necessity that Islam has recognized. Humans find all sorts of ways to find relief. Life is difficult, life is full of challenges, there is constant stress on you. You need to find some way to relieve yourself of those difficulties at a psychological level, at a spiritual level. And that's why humans invent all sorts of man-made activities, breathing activities and yoga and other sorts of relief. You have the prayer. It allows you to take a break from the difficulties and the stresses of life, even for a few moments. And in that time, your alone time with God, you get to connect with the divine. You get to escape a little bit of the materiality and materialism of this world. But we also said that prayer is a duty. Beyond all the benefits, and there are many, many more that we can mention, beyond the benefits, the prayer is a duty. God is expecting you to pray. In the verses that we mentioned yesterday, one of the verses was saying that not only God will witness you and every action and every intention behind every action, but also His messenger. That same messenger who introduced this same form of prayer to humanity is waiting for you, who claims adherence and loyalty to Him, is waiting for you to perform that prayer. The Imam of your time, who witnesses all of your actions, is waiting for you to perform that prayer. If there is one defining ritual, one defining action in Islam, it is that of prayer. There is a saying in Islam, very famous, and we all learn it when we were very young, that says that the prayer is the pillar of religion. If you think about a building, the reason why they put the pillar in the middle is to hold the entire structure. If you take out the pillar, everything crumbles. The structure of religion is supported by prayer. Then that saying goes on, if it is accepted, if your prayers are accepted, then so will be everything else. And if it is rejected, then so will be everything else. In other words, it's as though the saying is trying to say that if Islam is a circle, you are either in or out. And what determines whether you're in or out is performing the prayer. As simple as that. In terms of rituals, in terms of actions, it starts from the prayer. No other action is looked at if the prayer is not there. We were also saying yesterday and the nights before that every faith requires an action that corresponds to that faith. Faith requires fruits that correspond to it. The first action that you have to perform, as we have seen, is a prayer. So question number one is, do you pray? Question number two becomes, how do you pray? Do you take care of your prayer? Do you pray on time? Yesterday we spoke quickly about the order of the universe, and we said that there are rules, there are laws, there are principles that govern the world we live in. And those rules and laws are also in place for the non-material world. One of those rules, one of those laws for the non-material world is that if you want to be a successful human being in all the aspects of your life, perform your prayers on time. You have 5 prayers to perform every day. Perform all your prayers on time and you will be a successful human being in every aspect of your life. We have many sayings confirming this. And even without thinking about the spiritual, non-material aspects of life, if we think about it logically, it makes perfect sense. First of all, you have to be an organized human being to be able to constantly perform your prayer on time. It forces you to be organized. It makes you a human being with a mission, with a plan. It forces you to prioritize your life. You know what is important and what is more important. And you can put things ahead of others based on that. And then you show that to God. You show that you're ready whenever the call for the prayer happens to take place, you are ready to obey. The prayer, given this importance, to recognize this importance, can also be prepared ahead of time. Think about the prayer as being a very important appointment that you have. Think of the prayer as being the most important job interview that you will have. Think of the prayer as being a date that you're going to have with your beloved. The prayer is all those things. Try to put forth yourself in the best light before God. And this requires a preparation before, and it also requires the attention and the care and the concentration during the prayer. Just like any of those kinds of meetings and interactions would. And the last point, very quickly, is that the prayer is something very practical. You can't really learn it by looking in books or hearing about it in theory. Make sure that you understand every part of the prayer, every action that needs to be performed in practical terms. Have someone show you every part of the prayer. If the prayer is being performed 5 times a day, every single day for your entire life, and if it is that important and holds that place in religion, then it may be worth investing a few minutes to understand how it is done properly. The second action that I wanted to talk about today, again, glimpses of it, and this action could also be considered a ritual, is that of hijab. And I'm using the word hijab without translating it, because the same word, the term, has now entered the English vocabulary. If you say hijab in these Western societies, everybody knows what you're talking about. And that is because the reality, the phenomenon itself has entered the Western societies. So why do we talk about hijab, which most people would assume is mostly a woman's issue, in a public gathering? And the point I'm trying to make is that hijab does not concern women in Islam. Hijab concerns every Muslim. the notion and the philosophy of hijab have to be understood properly in order to be defended properly. And then we all agree that the best defense, the strongest defense for hijab is actually wearing it. In modern societies, the greatest, the most influential symbol that presently exists for religion and for identity is hijab. The issue is that the philosophy of hijab and what it stands for are oftentimes incompatible with the values and the worldview that are adopted in Western societies and postmodern societies. And so in a lot of cases, whenever they want to address hijab, it always starts with a false assumption, whether it is implied or whether it is explicitly, openly stated. And that assumption is that hijab implies the subservience, the submission of women, and the domination of men in Islamic societies. First of all, especially from the perspective of the sisters, this is utter nonsense. For the simple reason that they know that it has nothing to do with their realities and with their existential experience. They know that they're not wearing the hijab because they're being dominated. The second issue with this way of talking about hijab, is that it is, in addition to being very disrespectful because of that assumption, it also makes it a non-objective approach. When you go in to study something, you're supposed to be neutral. You can't go in studying something claiming objectivity and then have assumptions about it without understanding it first, and then making up your mind. This double standard is very clear because the only modest code or modest dress, as is referred to, that is subjugated to this kind of approach is the Islamic hijab. This is not applied when they look at the modest code, for instance, of the nuns in a church. So the point I'm trying to make, in addition to the points we just did to refute the claim that hijab is about the subservience of women and the dominance of men, is to start with this one question. Would you, dear sisters, still wear the hijab if there were no men at all on earth? And the Islamic answer to that question is yes. So we have to think now, what are the situations in which Islam asks from women to wear the hijab? First one, the very obvious one, is that you have to wear the hijab in front of a foreigner or a stranger. My translation of the word in fiqh, ajnabi. And if I can stop for 1 second here to mention very quickly, this word is chosen very accurately in Islam. In Islam, there is nothing between having a legitimate relationship either of blood or marriage with a woman and being an ajnabi. There's nothing in between. You cannot have friends. You cannot have close relationships in the romantic sense as we understand it in these societies in Islam, unless you accept the full responsibility that comes with that relationship, so you make it valid and legitimate. This is clearly stated in the Quran. The Quran, when it talks about women, the woman you can marry or you should marry, At some point it says, وَلَا مُتَّخِذَاتِ أَخْدَانٍ. Women who do not have that word akhdan, we don't use it a lot in Arabic. It's basically the equivalent of present day boyfriend. The Quran says don't marry women who have boyfriends. And that's why I mentioned the point when the fiqh, when the Islamic law chose the word ajnabi, is because there's nothing in between. You're either a mahram, you're either a blood relative to the woman, or you're a stranger. And there's nothing in between. Anyways, first case where you have to wear your hijab is in front of the ajnabi. The second situation that we can think of very quickly at the top of our heads is when you perform the pilgrimage. It is one of the conditions of validity of the pilgrimage that you wear your ihram. Even if you are all alone on earth, you're the only woman, you're the only human being left on earth, in order for your pilgrimage to be valid, you have to wear your hijab. Another case that you do every single day, when you perform your daily prayers. Even if you're all alone in your house and you decide to go inside your room and lock the door and know that no one can see you performing your prayer, one of the conditions of validity of the prayer is that you wear your hijab. Which means what? Which means that the hijab is not about the segregation of men and women or the domination of men over women. The role of the hijab in the relationship between men and women is a small part of its function. The hijab is a state of mind. The hijab is a psychological and spiritual state. The outside manifestation of that internal state is the clothes that you wear that you call hijab. What you're supposed to feel, what you're supposed to experience when you wear the hijab is the same thing you're supposed to feel when you stand up to perform your prayer. The same physical state, the same psychological, the same spiritual state that you feel when you stand up to perform your prayer or to perform the pilgrimage while wearing the hijab when you're all alone. This is what you're supposed to feel when you wear the hijab in public. The hijab is not a sign of weakness and submission and subservience. It's not a sign of backwardness. It's not a lack of civility. When you wear the hijab, you're telling the world you're not cheap. When you wear the hijab, you're telling the world you're a human being with convictions. A human being with an unshakable knowledge of your beliefs, where you stand in life. You have the confidence to stand out in society if you believe in what you're doing. You don't wear the hijab because someone told you to. You are the one who decided to wear the hijab. And with that, we understand that there are challenges. But if there are challenges and you may not like that aspect of a thing, of an activity, it doesn't mean that you're not the one deciding to do it. We all do things in which there are many challenges. You may decide to go to university and study for years and stay up all night studying. You may decide to work out and your muscles get sore and you sweat and you're tired. But you believe in what you're doing, so you still do it, even though there are difficulties with it. It's still your decision. And that gives it more worth and more merit, and it makes it that much more special. So to my sisters, I say, remember that there is a very big responsibility on your shoulders when it comes to hijab. As much as it represents you and is a sign, an indication of your character, when you wear the hijab, you are a representative of your religion. You are representing 14 centuries of Islam and Tashayyu. Carry that responsibility with honor. Don't do anything to degrade it. Wear the hijab fully. If you wear the hijab and you also wear makeup at the same time, you're contradicting the message of the hijab. If you wear the hijab and at the same time you wear tight clothes and the rest of your body, you're contradicting the message of the hijab. Don't do anything that degrades the hijab. Don't do anything that encourages the position of those who are against hijab in the first place. And in addition to that, I have to add to my dear brothers, because hijab, as we said, is not only a woman's responsibility. The same responsibilities that apply to women also apply to men. In fact, some of our scholars in their legal books have said that it is an obligation for men to observe the same dress code as women, except for the covering of the hair of the head. A lot of scholars still hold that view today, but they say that this is as a matter of precaution. As men, we're not allowed to do things that degrade this hijab because it represents our religion. Be careful with your eyes. Use your eyes correctly. Don't let them wander where they're not supposed to, because this degrades hijab. Be careful with your actions. Flirting and laughing too much with people of the opposite gender degrades hijab. Don't do things. Do not do things that you don't want to see your sisters who are wearing the hijab do. You have the same duty. You have the same responsibility. If we go back to the events of Karbala, we see in them, on the dunes, in the battlefield of Karbala, the most thorough, the most perfect manifestation, the most perfect execution of the rituals of Islam in the most difficult circumstances. When it was time to perform the prayer on the battlefield of Karbala, one of the companions of the Imam came to the Imam and reminded the Imam that it was now time to perform the midday prayer. So the Imam blessed him and prayed for him. And then the Imam and his companions stood up and performed the prayer, while that companion and another one stood guard, defending and protecting the Imam until they finished the prayer. By the time the Imam finished the prayer, that companion had 70 wounds from spears and arrows in his body, and he crumbled and he died there. Don't let these sacrifices for something like the prayer go to waste if you truly believe in the Imam and what he stood for. Lady Zainab, peace upon her, demonstrated to the world the role of the Muslim woman in the most difficult of circumstances. She carried half the load. She performed half the mission with her brother, an infallible Imam. All the while, never weakening from any parts of the rituals of Islam. We pray to God that He may give us the courage and the determination to understand our rituals and to understand our religion, and to keep performing according to our duties, even if the circumstances are not always as favorable as we would like them to be. May God's peace and blessings be upon Imam al-Hussein and his companions and his family members, and upon you all. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.